Hello, and welcome to The Critique. We're jumping straight into a transcript from a YouTube video by Digital Solace called This Will Only Find You Once, Then Make You Unrecognizable.
Right.
At its core, it's a direct-address monologue. It uses this extended theater metaphor to urge listeners to stop performing inauthentic roles they learn in childhood and reclaim who they really are.
And I have to say, I've been sitting with this text for a while, and that central idea, the theater of the self, it's incredibly potent.
It is.
But the execution, it feels like it's struggling to support the weight of that metaphor sometimes.
Agreed. Let's get right into that. The first thing that really jumps out is about the structure and the pacing.
Yes, the pacing.
The material relies too heavily on this cyclical repetition in the first half. It really delays the central argument, and, it risks fatiguing the audience before the pivot even happens.
That is the immediate friction I felt. It's like the engine is revving, but the car isn't actually moving.
Exactly.
You can feel the writer trying so hard to make sure the listener gets it, but in doing that, they just create this loop.
It's a triple start, isn't it? If you look at the text, it loops through the diagnosis 3 distinct times. First, it's waking up tired, the exhaustion.
Right.
Then it's, let me tell you what's actually happening, where it introduces the cast in a role light.
And then again.
And then immediately after that, it's here's what nobody tells you, which explains learning the role in childhood. It's the same point 3 times.
Right. And while repetition can be hypnotic, here it just feels hesitant. The listener gets the metaphor of the costume almost immediately. It's so intuitive. So by explaining it 3 different ways, we're just stalling. We risk the listener thinking, okay, I get it, I'm performing, can we move on, before we even offer a solution.
Precisely. It makes a strong case for the symptoms, but it just drags it out. So let's talk about a fix. The suggestion here is pretty direct. Condense those first 3 paragraphs into one single punchy diagnostic section.
That makes so much sense. We have to respect the audience's intelligence. They clicked on the title because they already feel the pain, right?
Right.
We don't need to spend the first few minutes convincing them they're in pain. Building on that, what if we merged the symptoms, the exhaustion, directly with the cause, the childhood roles?
So you get to the complication.
That you are now choosing it so much faster.
That would be a huge improvement. So for a concrete example, you could look at that section starting, let me tell you what's actually happening. Just cut that phrasing entirely. It's filler. You can merge the list of specific roles directly into the section about looking in the mirror. You don't need to announce, I am now going to explain the metaphor. Just explain it.
And to add to that, I'd say remove the specific list of roles, the victim, the people pleaser, in that second iteration. The scripts list them early, then again later.
Right.
If we save that specificity for the moment of confrontation later in the script, it just maximizes the impact. If you list the roles too early and too often, they lose their punch.
You keep the powder dry for the emotional peak. That's a great point. By tightening that start, you create urgency. The listener feels like they're being led somewhere, not just walking in circles.
It changes the energy from, let me explain your life to you, to, okay, we are going somewhere to fix this.
Now, let's move on. That pivot to personal responsibility brings us to our next lens, which is all about tone and audience alignment.
Ah, yes.
The tonal shift from empathy to this very strict accountability is just too abrupt. It lacks the nuance needed to keep the listener on board for the hard truth.
This is the most critical juncture in the script. It's also probably the most dangerous one for the writer, because you're trying to move from I see you to now you need to change.
And that's the risk. The text says you're not trapped in this role, you're choosing it every single day. And look, that's the core of the argument, probably the most important line.
But it's a hammer.
It's a hammer. It risks triggering intense defensiveness because it sort of minimizes the psychological difficulty of breaking these trauma bonds. It makes it sound like a simple decision, not a survival mechanism.
That's it. It's the tough love approach, isn't it? But by saying it's the devil you know, without really acknowledging the visceral fear of losing safety, the speaker sounds more like an accuser than a guide. If I'm a listener and I hear you're choosing this, my brain might just scream, no, I'm not. I'm suffering. And suddenly I've stopped listening and I'm just arguing with you in my head.
We want to avoid that internal debate entirely. We want them to stay open. So the suggestion here is to insert a bridge of validation before you swing the hammer of accountability.
A bridge. I love that idea. We need to acknowledge why the choice is being made. Neurological safety, fear of abandonment. before you label it a choice. You have to validate the logic of the defense mechanism first.
Exactly. So let's look at a concrete way to build that bridge. Currently, the text jumps right to, here's the part that's going to hurt. I would draft a sentence to insert right before you're choosing. Something like, I know it doesn't feel like a choice, because your nervous system screams that safety lies in the script.
That is excellent. It validates the biological reality before it challenges the behavior. It says, I know you're not doing this on purpose, which lowers their guard enough to actually hear what comes next.
And to build on that, maybe soften the accusation by briefly switching the pronoun. Instead of just, you are choosing, what if we switched to we for that one transition?
Ooh, that's a powerful shift.
Something like, we keep performing because the unknown is terrifying. It shows a shared humanity.
It says, I'm in the trenches with you, before pivoting back to, but you need to make the change. It stops the speaker from sounding like they're on a pedestal, shouting down. It creates a partnership.
That pronoun shift is such a subtle but powerful tool. It disarms just enough to let the hard truth land.
I agree.
Okay, let's move to the third segment. Let's look at this through the lens of angle and actionability. The script does a great job of deconstructing the problem, but it fails to provide a concrete new script for that moment when the listener actually breaks character.
Yeah, that's laid out very clearly. The script is very heavy on the internal mindset, isn't it? It tells you the philosophy of the theater, but not the blocking of the actual scene.
Correct. It tells the listener to drop the costume and warns them that people will get upset. It says, the audience loses their minds.
It does.
But it doesn't give them any tools for how to handle that confrontation. It identifies a danger, but offers no weapon.
That makes sense. But the script does ask them to write, I'm done performing in the comment section. Isn't that an action?
It is an action, but it's a digital one. It's performative in its own way, ironically.
Ah, I see what you mean. A YouTube comment doesn't help when your partner or your parent is standing in your kitchen demanding the old you.
Right.
There's a gap between the digital commitment and the analog reality. Writing a comment is easy. Disappointing your mother is hard.
Exactly. The weakness is relying on the comments as the only action step. So the suggestion is to add a micro script or a specific behavioral tool for those real-world interactions.
That's fascinating. We don't want to give them a new role to play, right? We're not just handing them a new script to memorize, but we can give them a tool to navigate the friction.
A tool, not a script. I like that.
I'd suggest giving the listener the actual words to say to the audience, their family, their friends, when that revolt happens.
Okay, let's give a concrete example of that. The script says, they pressure you to get back in character. Right there, that's where we should insert a line the listener can actually use. Something like, I know I'm behaving differently, and that might be scary for you, but I'm trying to be honest for the first time.
That is very strong. It acknowledges the other person's fear, which diffuses tension while still maintaining the boundary. It turns this abstract idea of dropping the role into a sentence they can actually speak.
It anchors the advice in reality. And to add another layer, I would suggest replacing the vague instruction, step off the stage, with a specific physical action.
Like a somatic cue?
Exactly. For example, suggest that when they feel that pressure to people please, they take a literal, physical pause, 3 seconds of silence, a deep breath. That physical act is the curtain drop.
I love that. It moves the concept from the head to the body. Stepping off stage becomes taking a breath. It makes the abstract actionable. It gives them something to do when the panic sets in.
Okay, now let's look closely at the ending. This brings us to our final lens, opening and closing effectiveness. The conclusion here suffers from false endings that really dilute the emotional power of that final curtain call.
I noticed this as well. The pacing just kind of stutters right at the finish line. It's like a movie that has 3 fade to blacks.
It does. Let's analyze that final 20% of the text. It peaks emotionally at the call to write, I'm done performing.
Right. That feels like the end.
It should be. But then it just drags on. It goes into a request to share the video, then a mention of super thanks, then a reassurance about people leaving your life, and then it goes back to the metaphor.
And look, creators need to ask for engagement, of course. But structurally, you are right. The administrative requests, the subscribe, the super thanks, they interrupt the hypnotic, cinematic flow of the lights going out.
They do.
It breaks the fourth wall in the wrong way. It reminds the listener they're just watching a YouTube video, right at the moment they're trying to visualize their life changing.
It snaps them out of the trance too early. It feels like the house lights coming on before the movie's actually over. So The suggestion is to reorder the ending. Group all the housekeeping, the subscribe and share stuff, before the final emotional crescendo.
That seems like such a logical fix. You get the business out of the way so you can leave the listener sitting in the dark, so to speak, with the full weight of the message. I'd recommend ending on the strongest image, that unrecognizable self, without watering it down with platform metrics right after.
Let's give a concrete example of that reorder. I'd move the share this with someone and super thanks section to the middle. Maybe right after the prompt to comment, I'm done performing.
That works perfectly. You say, "Right, I'm done performing" in the comments, and if you want to support this message, use super thanks. Then you pivot back to the final monologue. You clear the deck for the finale.
And for the very end, I would rewrite that sequence so the last words are the most powerful ones from the entire text. Currently, the script ends with, "What walks back into your life won't be performing for anyone, not even you."
That line is incredible. It's haunting in the best way.
It is, but in the current draft, it's surrounded by a lot of winding down and reassurance. The concrete example here is simple. Ensure that line stands alone. Cut all the fluff around it. Let the silence after "not even you" be the end of the content.
I completely agree. It seals the deal. It leaves the listener with the promise of the entire premise becoming unrecognizable. If you follow that up with, "Don't forget to like and subscribe," you just deflate the entire balloon. You turn a spiritual moment into a transaction.
So, a key theme running through all of this, really, is about tightening the narrative arc to match the power of the metaphor. We're just polishing the glass so the image is clearer. To recap for the listener today. First, structure and pacing. Condense that diagnostic loop. You've got 3 diagnoses where you only need one. Merge the symptoms with the cause so the engine stops revving in neutral.
Second, the tone. Bridge that gap between empathy and accountability. Don't just tell them they're choosing their trauma responses. Validate the safety mechanism first. And maybe use "we" statements to lower their defenses so they don't start a mental argument.
Third, actionability. Provide real-world scripts, not just internal decisions. The theater is a mental model, but the listener lives in the real world. Give them the lines to say when the audience revolts. Don't just tell them to leave a YouTube comment.
And finally, the ending. Consolidate the housekeeping. Don't let super thanks step on your final curtain call. And on that powerful image of the authentic self, not the mechanics of the platform. Preserve that cinematic immersion until the very last second.
This material has incredible potential. The theater of the self is such a universal experience, and the raw material here is so perceptible. With these adjustments, it won't just be a video they watch. It will be a tool they can actually use.
I agree. The metaphor is more than strong enough to carry the weight. We just need to clear the path so the listener can walk it. It's about removing the friction between the insight and the impact.
We invite you to make these adjustments and submit the revised draft for a final polish. We would love to see how that new ending lands. Thank you for listening to The Critique.